Shalom, Bill here. Welcome back to part 2 of our 5th explainer on the biological reality of the hive. Now, if you caught part 1, you remember we watched nectar literally stop being nectar. We traced it right through the bee's own digestive glands, through that massive mouth-to-mouth exchange across the entire hive, and through the enzymes that completely rewrote its chemistry before a single cell was even sealed. Bees do not collect honey, they make it. That's exactly where we left off. But today, we need to finish the picture, because there are 2 more layers to this biological reality, and honestly, both of them matter a whole lot more than you might think.
Right out of the gate, we have to realize that honey doesn't just finish maturing in some neutral, sterile container. It matures inside a structure that is built entirely from the bee's own body, starting with the wax itself. The honeycomb isn't just a physical storage space, it's this profound, literal extension of the insect's biology. Worker bees actually secrete this wax right out of 8 specialized glands on the underside of their abdomens. It comes out as a liquid, and then it hardens into these tiny, thin scales. From there, the house bees chew those scales up, mixing them extensively with their own saliva and enzymes until the wax softens just enough to mold into those perfect little comb cells. So the container itself is a direct product of their internal chemistry.
But it's not just wax. The whole inside of the hive is sealed up tight with something called propolis. They create this by gathering plant resins and mixing them directly with, you guessed it, their own saliva and wax. Propolis lines the brood cells, it seals up the cracks, and it basically functions as the colony's overarching immune barrier.
And it's actually wild to see just how seriously the hive treats propolis as an immune response. Peer-reviewed research shows that when an invading pest dies inside the hive and it's too big for the worker bees to haul out, they literally entomb the corpse in propolis to keep decay from spreading. Now, think about this for a second, because this is crucial. That is the exact same material sealing the cells where your honey is ripening. It's the same bee body product, working right alongside the wax, doing the exact same job it always does.
You know, this actually brings up a personal story that completely changed how I look at this entire subject. This past spring, my family and I moved in with my mother-in-law up here in Michigan, and we parked our cars under this massive maple tree in her yard. Well, as the weather warmed up, the cars started getting covered in what we just assumed was sap. It was this incredibly thick, sticky coating that would come right back within a day or 2 of washing the cars. It was relentless. My son literally stopped parking under the tree altogether. The rest of us just kind of waited it out, figuring, hey, the tree's going to stop running sap eventually, right? But it went on for months. Well, one evening in early June, my wife and I were sitting outside, and I just wondered out loud, when is this sap finally going to stop? So we pull out our phones, look into it, and man, what we found completely shifted my understanding of the source material. It wasn't tree sap at all. It was honeydew. That's the continuous sugary excretion of cottony maple scale insects. These are little sap-feeding insects that had infested the branches by the hundreds, and as they fed, they were just continuously excreting their excess sugar, coating absolutely everything beneath the canopy.
Once we realized what was going on, we walked over, looked up into the branches, and it was just swarming. Honeybees, bumblebees, wasps, yellow jackets, the whole gang. All of them just flocking to feed on that honeydew. We looked over at the flower beds right nearby, and they were almost entirely empty of pollinators. Maybe a random bee here or there. And this perfectly illustrates something people always miss. It wasn't that the flowers had run dry. They were right there, fully blooming. The bees simply preferred the tree, because honeydew took 0 work to access. No landing on a delicate bloom, no digging around for nectar. It was fast food, and the bees treated it exactly that way. So for weeks, any honey being produced by those bees would have been made almost entirely from insect waste, sealed up in wax, and eventually sold in a jar labeled honey.
Which really brings us to the core bridge question this whole explainer is circling around. If the starting point of honey can be that unpredictable, derived from a beautiful flower one week and literal insect waste the next, but sealed the exact same way either time, then what is actually still sitting in that jar when it reaches the shelf?
Let's use a super simple analogy to break this down. Think about making a cup of coffee. You can filter out the coffee grounds easily, right? Because grounds are just solid particles suspended in the liquid. But you absolutely cannot filter out the caffeine, because the caffeine isn't floating around as a solid, it's dissolved entirely into the liquid itself. A filter is only ever going to catch what's floating. While processing honey works exactly the same way, commercial filtration catches the suspended, visible debris. It grabs the wax flakes, the random legs, wings, maybe some pollen. But all that's doing is changing the honey's appearance. It's only catching the grounds, so to speak. But when you look at the hard data from full proteomic analysis, you see exactly what stays behind. And every single bit of this comes directly from the bee's own body. That same invertase we traced in part 1,
it's still fully active in the jar. Diastase is in there, which is actually the enzyme so reliable they use it to grade honey. You've got glucose oxidase from the head glands, B-defensin 1 and hymenoptocin, which are immune proteins, major royal jelly proteins, literally the same secretion the bee uses to feed its queen, proline, straight from their salivary glands, and honestly, even the bee's own DNA is in there, completely traceable to the exact species that made it. None of that is floating debris. All of it is entirely dissolved, passing right through the filter without a scratch.
And there's actually a second layer to this whole filtration limit. See, beeswax itself acts like a chemical sponge. It absorbs and holds environmental residues and pesticides over time. And studies clearly show that those residues eventually migrate and dissolve directly into the stored honey, placing them way beyond the reach of any physical filter you could possibly run it through.
If you want real-world proof of this, just look at pediatric medicine. The CDC puts out a very firm warning to parents, telling them never to feed honey to an infant under 1 year old. Why? Because of the very real risk of Clostridium botulinum spores. Ordinary processing, the warming, the straining, none of it touches microscopic elements like those spores. Think about it. If processing could truly turn honey into a sterile, neutral syrup, that medical warning wouldn't even need to exist.
For close to 2,000 years, honey has basically enjoyed this quiet exemption in religious tradition. And that exemption has always rested on one of two massive assumptions. Either honey is simply flower nectar, completely untouched, passed along by a bee acting like some tiny flying cargo ship, or that the bee's own biology has absolutely nothing to do with what ends up in the jar. But neither of those assumptions survives contact with modern biological evidence. It isn't only flower nectar. As we saw, sometimes it's honeydew, and it is never untouched. Every single enzyme, every immune protein, every trace of that bee's biology stays right there in the jar, dissolved way past the reach of anything a filter can do.
It's interesting because Scripture actually hinted at this biological reality long before any of us had the microscopes to prove it. Job 14:4 says, "Who can bring a clean thing out of an unclean? There is not one." Now, we're not going to lean on that verse here as the main engine of our argument. We don't really need to.
The biological evidence alone tells us that honey is profoundly different from what history has mistakenly assumed it to be. And look, this didn't happen because of some bad intention. It was just an assumption that nobody ever had the scientific tools to properly test until right now. The biological reality of the hive is simply inseparable from the final product. So knowing all this, you really have to ask yourself, when a 2,000-year-old tradition conflicts so completely with modern, observable biological evidence, which one actually defines what is sitting inside that jar?